I remember this trip with a kind of cold sweat that still hits me when I think about it. I was in my early 30s, itching for some quiet time away from work, people, noise, everything. I decided to go solo camping in a remote patch of bushland. This wasn't one of those polished campgrounds with toilets and other people nearby. This was real, wild land, tucked away and overgrown, with dry leaves, old branches, and the heavy smell of eucalyptus all around. I picked a small clearing, not too big, but open enough to set up my small tent and leave a safe area for a little fire. I brought my usual gear, a basic tent, sleeping bag, small stove, water bottles, some dried food, and a headlamp. I remember thinking how quiet it was there. No cars on distant roads, no sounds of hikers or campers. Just me and the soft rustling of bush creatures. Small lizards, birds hopping through the undergrowth, maybe a possum or two. By late afternoon, I'd set up camp, boiled some water for noodles, and sat with a small mug of tea, watching the light fade. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the world went even quieter. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. I poked at the fire, watched the sky turn from deep blue to black, and after a while, I crawled into my tent. That night was cold. I'd expected it. Winter nights in the bush can chill you right through. I wrapped up tight, shifted on the thin sleeping pad, and closed my eyes. The sounds outside were just natural noises at first. A twig snapping here, a rustle there. Nothing that set off alarms in my head. But at some point deep in the night, I woke up. It wasn't the usual restless shift of a camper getting used to the hard ground. No, I woke because I heard something. A sound that cut through the silence. A solid, wet plop. It was close. For a few seconds, I stayed frozen, ears straining, heart suddenly hammering in my chest. I waited to hear follow-up sounds, movement, steps, anything. But there was nothing. Just that one heavy drop onto the dry ground and then stillness. I convinced myself it was probably a branch falling, or maybe a big possum knocking something loose from the trees. I stayed awake for a long time, though, staring into the dark of the tent, straining to hear anything more. When the night remained silent, I finally dozed off again. Morning came slowly. The light outside the tent was soft, gray, and cold. I unzipped the flap, planning to start the little stove and make some coffee. As soon as the tent door opened, I froze. There, not even a meter from where I lay sleeping, was the severed head of a kangaroo. It was unmistakable. The soft brown fur, the familiar ears, the lifeless, glassy eyes. Blood had dried at the neck, the edges ragged and dark. Flies were already gathering. My stomach twisted, and for a long moment, I just stared at it, unable to move. There was no way it had been there the night before. I cleared that spot carefully when I set up camp, picking rocks and sticks out of the way. Someone or something had placed it there during the night. I stood up slowly, eyes scanning the tree line, the undergrowth, every shadow. I saw no one, but the weight of that silence was heavier now. My mind raced through every possibility. Was someone messing with me? Hunters? Locals? Had an animal done this? But no animal would carefully place a head like that beside a human's tent. Suddenly, the remoteness of the place hit me hard. I was entirely alone. No cell signal, no quick escape. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave. I forced myself to stay focused, shoving gear into my pack with shaking hands. I doused the small fire, zipped the tent up haphazardly, and shoved everything into the back of my car as fast as I could. Every few seconds, I shot glances over my shoulder, expecting to see someone emerge from the trees. But there was never anyone there. I drove away, the tires kicking up dust and gravel, not stopping until I was a good hour down the road, closer to the main highway. Only then did I let myself breathe properly. My hands were stiff on the steering wheel, heart still thudding from the rush of adrenaline. Even after I got home, I kept running the scene through my head. Who would have done that? Why? I thought about the sound I'd heard. That single, heavy plop. I realized then that it wasn't a branch or a rock. It had been the kangaroo's head, dropped right beside my tent. Someone had been close enough to leave it there without waking me up fully. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly missed something worse, that whoever left that gruesome sign hadn't wanted to hurt me directly. Not yet. But they wanted me to know they were there. I never went back to that part of the bush. I stuck to more public camping grounds after that, places where you could see other campers nearby, where there were rangers, where the night noises were just animals and the wind, not the sound of something being left just outside your tent. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there with me that night. I never found footprints or tracks, never heard another sound once morning came. But that image, the quiet presence of that kangaroo's head placed deliberately beside where I slept, has stayed with me in a way no animal encounter or rough camping trip ever has. Somewhere out there, someone had been watching me. They'd been close enough to leave a message, and they'd chosen not to show themselves. That's the part that still makes the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. Not what happened, but what didn't. It was late at night, close to 2 a.m., when I sat beside the fire at the campsite. We had been camping deep in the woods for the weekend, away from roads, houses, and people. There were 4 of us, me, my 2 friends Matt and Ryan's younger brother, Chris. We had been out here since the afternoon before, setting up our tents, collecting firewood, and making sure we had everything ready before the sun went down. By now, the fire had burned down low, just small flickers dancing on glowing red and orange embers. The wood had crumbled, and we didn't bother adding more since we were all starting to get tired and thinking about heading to bed soon. The air was cold and still, and the darkness beyond the circle of the campfire was thick. Without the fire or our flashlights, we wouldn't be able to see anything. Just black trees and the night pressing down on us. We were sitting quietly, half zoned out, the way people do late at night around a fire. The only sounds were the quiet crackling of the remaining wood and the occasional breeze moving the trees. Sometimes you'd hear an owl in the distance or small noises from the undergrowth. We weren't scared. We were used to the sounds of the woods, and we'd been out here before. Then we heard a rustling noise. It was faint at first, but enough to break the quiet. It came from the woods behind us, just past where the light of the fire stopped. I stiffened, feeling my heartbeat pick up a little. We all froze, looking into the darkness. The rustling continued, slow and low, like something small was moving through the dry leaves. Matt grabbed his flashlight and swung the beam around, cutting through the dark. Ryan and Chris followed with their own lights. We aimed them at the trees, scanning the shadows and brush. At first, we didn't see anything. The beams bounced off tree trunks and tangled roots, the forest floor covered in dead leaves and sticks. Then, all of a sudden, we saw movement. Something small burst out of the underbrush and ran straight toward us. I barely had time to process what I was seeing. It was a mole, a small, scruffy-looking mole, the kind you barely ever see during the day. Its tiny paws were moving fast, its body low and panicked. It didn't hesitate, didn't slow down. It came straight at the fire like it was blind or fleeing from something. Before any of us could react, the mole darted forward and ran right into the fire. We all screamed. I watched in shock as the little body hit the glowing embers. It let out no sound, but we heard the horrible sizzle as its fur and skin touched the heat. The smell was instant, burning hair, burning flesh. It twitched once, then went still, the small body smoking and blackening as the heat ate away at it. None of us moved. I could hear Chris making a choking sound behind me. Matt stepped back like he was going to be sick. Ryan's flashlight dropped slightly, the beam shaking in his hand. I just stared, wide-eyed, feeling my stomach twist. What had just happened? The woods were silent again, like nothing had happened. But there, in the middle of our campfire, was the blackened, curled-up shape of the mole, still smoking faintly. We didn't speak. We didn't know what to do. Eventually, we backed away and decided to go into our tents. No one wanted to sit by the fire anymore. I lay awake in my sleeping bag for a long time, listening for more rustling, half expecting to hear something bigger or stranger. But the woods stayed quiet. The next morning, I stepped out into the cold, damp air. The fire pit was cold now, just ashes and blackened wood. And right there, in the center, was the burned body of the mole. It was small, charred almost beyond recognition. Its little legs curled up under its body, its face half melted from the heat. We stood around it awkwardly, not knowing what to say or do. None of us wanted to just leave it there. It had died right in front of us, in a way that felt so strange and awful it didn't feel right to just ignore it. We decided to bury it. Ryan found a small shovel we had brought, and we picked a spot a little away from the camp. It was under a tree with soft soil, not too rocky. We dug a small hole, maybe a foot deep. I used a stick to lift the little body out of the ashes, trying not to gag at the smell still clinging to it. We placed it gently into the hole and covered it with dirt. We made a small mound of stones on top as a kind of marker. It felt silly in a way. This was just a mole, an animal we'd barely ever seen, that had probably been sick or confused. But it also felt right. Something about the way it had run straight into the fire, without fear or hesitation, unsettled us deeply. Afterward, we sat quietly around the cold fire pit. None of us really knew what to say. The rest of the day was calm. We packed up our things, cleaned up the campsite, and got ready to head back. The woods were peaceful again, the way they usually were. We didn't hear any strange noises, didn't see anything unusual. But the memory of that night stuck with me. Even now, months later, I still think about it sometimes. I keep wondering what had driven that mole to run like that. Was it sick? Scared? Was something chasing it? Or was it just confused, blind, and running toward the only light it saw in the darkness? I'll never know. But I remember the way it hit the fire, the smell of burning fur, the way we all screamed. Not because we were in danger, but because we were watching something small and alive destroy itself right in front of us. That night, I realized how thin the line is between life and death, even for the smallest creature. And maybe, in a way, we gave that mole a kind of respect it never would have gotten otherwise. We buried it, gave it a quiet spot under a tree, and left it in peace. When I think back on that camping trip, that's the image that stays with me. Not the fun we had, not the laughs or the food or the long hike we did the day before. What stays with me is the sight of that little creature running into the fire, and the small mound of stones we left behind, marking the place where it now rests. Sometimes, when I go camping now, I sit by the fire and watch the woods carefully. I listen for sounds, small or big, and I remember that night. And no matter how still and peaceful the night seems, I never let myself forget how quickly things can change. How something small and harmless can bring a chill into the heart of the warmest place. That trip didn't end in fear or danger, but it ended with a strange, sharp reminder of how fragile life is, even in the quietest corners of the world. And every time I light a fire now, I find myself glancing at the edges of the dark, wondering what might come running toward the flame. I've always remembered that trip, even though I was just a kid, 7, maybe 8 years old. My parents had taken us on a weekend camping trip out in the backwoods. We didn't go to a busy campground either. This was one of those quiet, out-of-the-way places where you had to drive on narrow dirt roads for miles before you reached the site. The kind of place where you barely saw another person the whole time. I remember feeling a bit sick in the car on the way there. My parents had given me some gravel for motion sickness. It always hit me hard, making me groggy, heavy-limbed, like my body was being pulled into sleep by invisible hands. I fell asleep in the back seat. I remember feeling the bump and jolt of the car as we went over rough patches in the road. I remember the hum of the tires, the way the sunlight flashed between the trees as we wound through the woods. And then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was inside a tent. For a few seconds, I lay there blinking, trying to understand where I was. I was under a sleeping bag, still heavy with sleep, but the world around me had changed. The back seat of the car was gone. Instead, I was in the soft yellow glow of a tent, with thin fabric walls around me, and the muffled sound of wind moving through the trees. I was also pantsless. That confused me most of all. I had gone to sleep in jeans, I was sure, but now I was just in my underwear and a t-shirt, tucked under blankets inside a tent I hadn't even seen before falling asleep. For a kid, that was both fascinating and disorienting. My parents must have carried me out of the car and set me up in the tent without me waking up. That idea amazed me. I lay there for a while just listening. I could hear the soft flap of the tent walls in the breeze. I could hear faint rustling noises outside, leaves moving, the occasional creak of branches. There were no voices, no cars, no sounds of civilization. It was so quiet that every little noise seemed loud. At first, I wasn't scared. I was just puzzled, trying to piece it together. But after a few minutes, a creeping sense of unease began to settle in my chest. It wasn't anything I could name right away, just a slow, uncomfortable realization. I didn't hear my parents. I didn't hear the familiar sounds of someone moving around a campsite. No footsteps, no zippers, no clatter of coolers or folding chairs, just the soft, distant sounds of the woods. I sat up slowly, blinking hard, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My head still felt foggy from the gravel. My mouth was dry. I pulled the sleeping bag down and swung my bare legs over the edge of the pad I was lying on. The floor of the tent was cool against my feet. I reached for the tent zipper and eased it down slowly, poking my head outside. The campsite was empty. There were 2 tents, the one I was in and another slightly larger one nearby. There was a dead campfire ring, cold and dark, with some blackened wood and ashes inside. A picnic table sat off to one side with a few scattered items. A lantern, a couple of plastic cups, a folded map. But no one was there. The car was gone. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that. The car was gone. I stepped out of the tent carefully, heart thudding. My bare feet touched the cool dirt, and I shivered. Where were my parents? I looked around in every direction. The trees were dense, tall, packed in tightly. The dirt road we had driven in on was just a narrow, rutted line disappearing into the trees. There was no sign of anyone. No voices, no footsteps, no movement. I walked over to the other tent and tried to open it. It was empty, too. Panic started to rise in my chest. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that maybe they had driven to get something, or maybe they were just out of sight. But the more I stood there, barefoot, in my underwear, in the middle of a silent, empty campsite, the more the fear built up inside me. I felt the stillness pressing in from all sides. I started walking around the edge of the site, peering into the trees, calling softly even though I knew no one would hear. My throat tightened. I remembered that I was a child, alone, deep in the woods with no car, no food, no water, no pants, no way to reach anyone. Suddenly, every little noise became sharp and threatening. The rustling leaves sounded like footsteps. The creaking branches sounded like something moving. The occasional snap of a twig made my skin crawl. I backed up to the tent and sat down on the edge, hugging my knees. I didn't know what to do. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time felt strange. I kept listening, eyes darting back and forth, heart racing. I tried to focus, to listen for anything human, anything familiar. And then I heard something, a sound. Not from the road, not from the campsite, but from the woods. Something big was moving through the undergrowth. I froze, breath caught in my chest, every muscle locked. It wasn't the soft rustle of a squirrel or bird. It was heavier, slower, pushing through the brush with weight and force. It was circling the campsite. I strained to see, peering between the trees, but the light was bad. The sun was already dropping lower, casting long shadows, making everything harder to see. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I wanted to run, but I had nowhere to go. I was barefoot, barely dressed, in the middle of nowhere. Running into the woods would be worse. The sound moved closer. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. The raw, hot panic of a child who knows they're in real trouble. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another second, I saw a shape moving between the trees. It was a person. Relief flooded through me so fast I almost collapsed. But then I realized it wasn't my parents. It was a stranger, a man I didn't recognize, wearing rough outdoor clothes, stepping carefully through the brush, eyes locked on the campsite. He didn't see me yet. I ducked back into the tent, pulling the flap closed, heart racing so hard I thought I might throw up. I crouched inside, trying to stay as small and quiet as possible. I could hear his footsteps now, crunching softly over the ground. Closer. I heard him walking around the tents, stopping, moving, pausing. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking, holding my breath. I stayed there for what felt like forever, heart hammering, waiting, listening. Eventually, finally, the footsteps moved away. I didn't move, couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed, terrified. The sun kept sinking, and the woods grew darker, the air colder. At some point, I heard a car. Not the strangers, my parents. I heard the crunch of tires on the dirt road, the familiar engine sound, the car pulling back into the sight. I burst out of the tent, sobbing, running barefoot toward them, shaking so hard I could barely stand. My parents were stunned to see me like that, but I couldn't explain everything at once. They calmed me down, got me wrapped up in warm clothes, held me tight. They said they had only gone to the ranger station to check in. They had been gone less than an hour. But I knew what I had seen. I told them about the man in the woods. We didn't stay the night. We packed up everything as fast as we could, throwing tents and gear into the car, not even bothering to fold things properly. My dad kept looking around, scanning the trees, tension in his face. We drove out of there as fast as the road allowed, not stopping until we were far away, back near town. We never went back to that site again. Even now, all these years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, remembering the sound of those footsteps circling the tent. I wonder what would have happened if my parents hadn't come back when they did. I wonder who that man was and why he was watching the camp. And I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't woken up at all. I was around 8 or 9 when this happened. I remember it vividly because after that trip, something inside me changed. I stopped loving camping the way I used to. My family used to camp a lot. My mom, my grandma, my brothers and I would load up the car and drive about 2 hours out of town to a small, quiet campground we'd gone to for years. We even had a particular campsite we always used. Over the years, we had made little improvements to it. We knew exactly where to pitch the tents, where to set the fire ring, where the best spots were to sit and watch the stars. It felt familiar, almost like a second home. That trip was supposed to be just like all the others. This time, though, we had my aunt and uncle's 2 dogs with us. They were both well-trained bird dogs, Star and Ariel. Star was the older of the 2, a sleek, quiet dog who always seemed watchful. Ariel was younger, still full of energy, but just as obedient. My aunt and uncle were both doing military tours overseas, so we were looking after the dogs while they were away. The first day of the trip was normal. We arrived, set up camp, and spent the afternoon playing near the water and exploring the woods. As night fell, we built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and settled into our tents. I remember feeling so safe. I was in the tent with my mom, grandma, and brothers. We were tucked into our sleeping bags, the dogs curled up near the door of the tent. The night outside was still and quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when you're deep in the woods, far from highways and city noise. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It was maybe 1 in the morning. At first, I didn't know why I had woken up. I just lay there blinking, listening, and then I heard it, a low, steady growl. It was Star. She was lying near the door of the tent, head up, body tense, growling quietly. Ariel was beside her, ears perked, eyes fixed on the tent wall. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Even as a kid, I understood that when a dog growls like that, something is wrong. My mom sat up too, and I saw her frown. She didn't say anything. I just remember the look on her face, serious and alert. She grabbed the small flashlight we kept by the tent flap and slowly unzipped the door. The dogs moved instantly, pushing ahead of her, but not running off. They stayed close, pressed to her sides, growling low in their throats. I sat there frozen in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. My brothers were awake now, too, their faces pale and scared. Outside, I could hear the dogs growling louder, their bodies moving in sharp, tense motions. My mom stepped forward, but the dogs wouldn't let her go toward the far end of the campsite. They kept pressing in front of her, blocking her, forcing her back toward the car. I remember the sound of their claws scraping the dirt as they shifted positions. I remember how their growls rumbled deep in their chests, not barking, not charging, just this controlled, furious warning. By now, all of us were sitting up, wide-eyed, shaking. My mom made a fast decision. She started pulling things into the car, fast and rough. Normally she was careful about packing, but not this time. She tossed gear into the trunk, hauled us out of the tent and into the car. I still remember the cold bite of the night air on my skin, the way my bare feet hit the dirt as we scrambled to the car. The dogs jumped into the back seat, still growling, still watching the darkness. My mom slammed the doors shut, started the engine, and we peeled out of there. We didn't even break down the tents properly. We just left them standing, half-packed, ropes loose, stakes still in the ground. We just drove. The road was narrow, twisting through the trees, the headlights cutting sharp beams through the darkness. I sat in the back seat, squeezed between my brothers, feeling their small bodies shaking. We were all shaking. The dogs were right behind us, still growling, their eyes locked on the rear window. 10 minutes down the road, we saw headlights, a car, following us. My mom gripped the steering wheel tight, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again and again. I could feel the tension radiating off her, the way her shoulders were stiff, her mouth set in a hard line. The dogs didn't stop growling. The car behind us kept following, matching our speed. No one spoke, but I remember the rising panic in the car. I could hear my brothers whimpering quietly. I could hear the sharp, heavy breaths of the dogs behind us. I could feel my own heart thudding so hard it hurt. We drove like that for miles. The car stayed right behind us. When we reached the edge of town, we had to cross a big bridge, the only way in. As we started across, the car behind us suddenly braked hard, spun around, and sped back the way we had come. I twisted around in my seat, watching it vanish into the darkness. Only then did the dogs stop growling. We pulled into a gas station on the edge of town. My mom got out to go inside. I remember she just wanted cigarettes, something to calm her nerves. But when she came back to the car, Star wouldn't let her in right away. The dog pressed up against the door, tail stiff, body tense, eyes locked on my mom until she crouched down and let the dog see her face clearly. Only then did Star relax and let her back in. We drove home the rest of the way in silence. That night stayed with me. Even now, I remember the raw, physical fear. The way my skin prickled, the way the dogs growled deep and low, the way the headlights of that following car burned in the rear window. I remember thinking how lucky we were. How lucky that the dogs had been there, how lucky my mom had trusted them, how lucky we had gotten out when we did. We never went back to that campsite. After that, we stuck to day trips, short walks, never staying overnight. And me, well, I never really enjoyed camping again. The woods that once felt safe and familiar now felt full of shadows and unseen eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that car on the dark road, and I wonder what might have happened if we'd stayed. If my mom hadn't listened to the dogs. If we'd just gone back to sleep. I'll never know. But I do know one thing. After that night, I was done with camping. For good. I've always loved the woods. I grew up near the edge of a national forest. My parents would take me hiking there when I was a kid, and later, as a teenager, I started going by myself or with friends. We thought we knew those woods. We knew the trails, the streams, the old bridges, the hidden spots where you could camp and nobody would bother you. We thought the woods were safe. We were wrong. It was late summer when I planned the trip. I was 19, home for a few weeks before heading back to college. I wanted one last trip, one last quiet night in the woods before school started again. I convinced two of my old high school friends, Matt and Josh, to come with me. We packed light, small tents, sleeping bags, food, water, some beers, flashlights, and a little camping stove. We left our phones mostly off. We wanted to disconnect. We wanted a simple trip, just the three of us and the forest. We picked a spot we'd camped at before, a clearing about 5 miles in, just off a little side trail that hardly anyone used. It was far enough from the main paths that we wouldn't be disturbed, or so we thought. The hike in was easy. We spent the afternoon setting up camp, gathering some firewood, and then just sitting around, talking and joking. The sun dipped low behind the trees, and the air got cooler. We built a small fire and cooked some simple food: hot dogs, beans, the usual. As night fell, we sat by the fire, drinking a little, watching the stars come out. It was quiet, except for the sounds of the woods, the chirping of insects, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the gentle crackle of the fire. I remember feeling peaceful, content. And then, sometime after midnight, we heard the first noise. It was faint, just a rustle maybe 50 feet away, near the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon. Nothing unusual. But then we heard it again, heavier this time. Footsteps, human footsteps. We froze, listening. The steps stopped. We shone our flashlights toward the trees, but the beams barely reached. Just shadows and branches, no shapes, no movement. We told ourselves it was probably nothing. Maybe another camper passing through. Maybe a hiker who got turned around. But deep down, I felt the first stirrings of unease. We put out the fire, deciding to call it a night. We climbed into our tents, zipped them up, and tried to sleep. I lay there, staring at the nylon ceiling, heart pounding. Every little noise outside made me flinch. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. And then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the campsite. I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps circled, pausing every few feet, as if whoever it was studying the tents, studying us. I wanted to call out, to say something, but I was frozen. Minutes passed, maybe longer, and then, finally, the steps faded away. I lay there, eyes wide open, until the first light of dawn. When we crawled out of our tents, we found footprints in the dirt. Human footprints, big ones. None of us mentioned it. None of us wanted to admit we'd heard the same thing. We packed up camp quickly, deciding to cut the trip short and head back to the main trail. But as we hiked, something felt wrong. We kept hearing noises, branches breaking, rocks shifting. Just behind us, just out of sight. We stopped several times, shining our flashlights into the trees, but saw nothing. And then, after maybe an hour of hiking, we found something that made my stomach drop. A small pile of rocks, stacked carefully in the middle of the trail. Balanced on top was a dead bird, its wings spread wide, eyes glassy and lifeless. None of us said a word. We stepped around it, kept moving, trying to stay calm. But the noises didn't stop. Whoever was out there, and by now we were sure it was a person, they were following us, staying just far enough back to avoid being seen, but close enough that we could hear them. We picked up our pace, and then, just as we reached the main trail, we saw something ahead. A figure standing right in the middle of the path. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes, face hidden in the shadows. We froze. The figure didn't move. For a long, tense moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. And then, slowly, the figure turned and walked into the trees, disappearing from sight. We ran. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. We ran all the way back to the trailhead, hearts pounding, lungs burning, until we reached the parking lot. And when we got there, we saw it. My car, the only one parked there when we arrived, had a long, deep scratch running from the front bumper to the back. The scratch was fresh, and on the windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a small piece of paper. Just one word, written in shaky, uneven letters: run. We didn't wait. We threw our gear into the trunk, piled into the car, and drove straight back to town. Nobody spoke the entire ride. When I got home, I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and sat in the dark for hours, heart still racing. I never reported it. I never told my parents. I never went back to that part of the woods again. Because here's the truth. The thing I learned that night, the thing that still keeps me up sometimes all these years later. The scariest thing in the woods isn't the animals. It isn't the dark. It isn't the isolation. The scariest thing in the woods is people. When I was 15, my friends and I decided we were old enough to go camping on our own. We'd been camping with family before plenty of times. But this time, we wanted it to be just us. No parents, no adults, just 3 kids out in the woods for the weekend. We thought it would be fun. We thought it would make us feel older. We were wrong. It was early summer. The weather was perfect, warm during the day, cool at night. Not too many bugs yet. We picked a spot that was maybe a 40-minute walk from the edge of town, near a small lake we knew. We figured it was far enough out to feel like real camping, but close enough that if anything went wrong, we could hike back in the morning. We packed light. 1 small tent, 3 sleeping bags, some snacks, water, a few flashlights, and a little camp stove. We didn't bring much else. We didn't think we'd need anything else. The hike out was easy. We set up camp near the water, built a little fire, and spent the evening joking, skipping rocks, and eating junk food. As the sun set, the sky turned that deep orange and purple, and everything felt calm and peaceful. We lay back on the grass, watching the stars come out, feeling like we were on top of the world. It was late when we finally crawled into the tent. We weren't really tired, but we figured we should get some sleep. We had more plans for the next day: fishing, hiking, maybe even swimming if the water wasn't too cold. I remember lying there, staring at the thin nylon of the tent roof, listening to my friends breathing beside me. It was quiet, except for the occasional crackle from the dying fire outside and the soft sounds of the night. Crickets, a distant owl, the wind moving through the trees. And then I started hearing other sounds. At first, it was faint, just the occasional rustle, like something moving through the brush. Maybe a rabbit, I thought. Maybe a raccoon. Nothing big, nothing to worry about. But the sounds didn't stop. They got closer. I heard branches snap, leaves crunch. My friend beside me started to panic a little, whispering that something was out there. I told him it was probably just an animal. We were in the woods, after all. Animals were part of the deal. But then we heard it, running. Heavy, fast footsteps, charging straight toward the tent. There was a moment, just a moment, where everything went dead silent. I realized what was about to happen. And then, whoever it was, they jumped on the tent. The whole thing collapsed in on us. Poles bent, fabric pressed down tight against our faces. We were tangled up, scrambling to push the tent off, panicking as we tried to figure out what was happening. By the time we clawed our way out, there was no one there. But we had made the mistake of revealing ourselves. We stood there in the dark, flashlights shaking in our hands, trying to shine them into the trees. That's when we saw them. 2 guys, maybe 18 or 19 years old, standing just at the edge of the trees watching us. They were tall, much bigger than us, and they weren't saying anything. They just stood there, barely visible in the shadows, watching. We were 3 15-year-old kids. We were screwed. We tried to ignore them, tried to pretend we weren't scared, but they didn't go away. All night, they stayed there, circling the edge of our little campfire. We could hear them moving just out of sight, the crunch of their boots, the occasional low laugh. At one point, one of them stepped forward just enough for us to see what he was holding. A hammer. Not a big sledgehammer or anything, just a regular claw hammer, but in that moment, it looked like the most dangerous thing in the world. We didn't sleep that night. We just sat by the fire, watching the dark, trying to keep the flames going, jumping at every sound. I remember thinking it was so strange. Why were they doing this? Why were they wasting their whole night just to mess with a bunch of kids? Didn't they have anything better to do? But the longer it went on, the less it felt like a joke. They weren't just messing around. They were waiting, watching, and we were stuck. When the first light of dawn started to break through the trees, we felt a tiny bit of relief. Maybe they'd get bored. Maybe they'd leave. Maybe we'd be okay. But they didn't leave. As the sun came up, they walked right up to us. No smiles, no laughs. Just that one guy still holding the hammer, his eyes flicking over us, sizing us up. I could tell they were looking for any excuse to start something. Any excuse to use that hammer. We just sat there, frozen, waiting. And then, after a long, tense moment, they turned and walked away. Just like that. They didn't run. They didn't look back. They just wandered off into the trees, like it had all been some weird game to them. We packed up our gear as fast as we could. shoving everything into our bags, barely folding the tent, not even bothering to eat or clean up. We just wanted to get out of there. The hike back felt like it took forever. Every sound in the woods made us jump. Every time we heard something behind us, we were sure they were following. But we made it back to town. We didn't tell anyone. Not our parents, not our teachers, not anyone. I think we were too embarrassed, or maybe we just didn't know how to explain it. But after that, we never went camping on our own again. We stuck to the backyard or the occasional family trip, but we never went back out into the woods alone. And to this day, when I hear footsteps behind me at night, when I hear the rustle of someone just out of sight, I think back to that night by the lake, and I remember just how fast things can go from fun to terrifying. That was the last time I ever wanted to feel like a grown-up. I decided to go camping alone that summer. I was 31, tired of city noise, tired of people, and just wanted to get away for a few days. I picked a state forest I'd never been to before. A big one, quiet, not too popular, with only a few rough trails and no marked campsites. That was the appeal for me. I didn't want a campground with RVs and screaming kids. I wanted to be far from people. I packed up my tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, and food. I also brought a good knife, some pepper spray, and a small hatchet. I wasn't stupid. I knew the woods could be dangerous. Not because of fairy tales or ghosts or anything like that, but because of real things, wildlife, weather, accidents, and sometimes people. It took a 3-hour drive to get there. I parked at the end of a dirt road, where a small sign marked the edge of the forest land. There were no other cars. That's exactly what I wanted. I locked up my car, hoisted on my pack, and hiked in. The trail was narrow, barely maintained, and after an hour or so, I stepped off it entirely, pushing through ferns and brush to find a flat, hidden spot between the trees where I could set up camp. I found a small clearing, maybe 15 feet across, surrounded by tall pines. The ground was soft with old needles, and the trees blocked most of the wind. I set up my tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and collected some deadfall for the small campfire I planned to make. That first night was peaceful. I cooked a simple meal on my little stove, sat by the fire until it burned down to coals, then climbed into my tent and read for a bit before falling asleep. I could hear the sounds of the forest outside, wind in the trees, the occasional rustle of small animals. Nothing strange. The second day, I hiked deeper into the woods, exploring. I didn't see another person. I didn't even see signs of people, no trash, no old campsites, no footprints. It was quiet, isolated, and perfect. I saw deer tracks, found an old mossy stump covered in mushrooms, and even spotted an owl in the late afternoon, blinking down at me from a high branch. When I got back to my campsite, I was tired but happy. I cooked dinner again, fed the small fire, and sat quietly, enjoying the isolation. It was that night, lying in my tent, that I first had the uneasy feeling. I woke up sometime after midnight. At first, I didn't know why. I lay there in my sleeping bag, blinking in the dark. Then I realized I'd heard something. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It had been a soft crunch, like a footstep, not far from the tent. I lay completely still, heart thumping. I listened hard, straining to hear. For a few minutes, there was nothing. I told myself it was probably just a deer or raccoon, curious about the camp. I had no food left outside, but animals don't know that. I forced myself to relax, though I didn't fall back asleep easily. By morning, I felt silly for worrying. I walked the edge of my campsite, looking for tracks. I didn't see anything obvious. Maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it really had been some small creature. Either way, it hadn't bothered anything, and I let it go. The third day, I decided to hike a bit farther, but something strange happened. About a mile from camp, I found something odd on the trail. It was a piece of fabric, tangled on a low branch. It was pale, almost white, maybe from a shirt or a dress, torn and weathered. That wasn't so strange by itself. People pass through here sometimes. But when I looked closer, the branch it was caught on wasn't at arm height, it was lower, about knee height. I pulled the fabric free and saw that it was stained and dirty, but fresh enough not to be old trash. I felt a small chill run through me. Who had passed through here? And when? I kept hiking, but the woods felt different that day, like they were watching. I know how that sounds. I don't mean it in a ghost story way. I mean that I became very aware of how alone I was, how quiet it was, and how easy it would be for someone to hide out here without anyone knowing. That evening, when I got back to camp, I was more careful. I made sure to pack up all my food scraps, douse the fire carefully, and check the area. I didn't see anything. Still, when I crawled into my tent that night, I kept the knife close at hand. I lay there in the dark, listening. It was well past midnight when I heard it again. A soft crunch, then another, then silence. My heart pounded. I stayed perfectly still. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't want to make a sound. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal again, but deep down I didn't believe that. The steps had been too slow, too careful. I don't know how long I lay there before I finally drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning I was jumpy. I walked the edge of the clearing again, looking for footprints. The pine needles made it hard to tell. I found nothing clear, no signs of anyone, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I decided I would leave the next day. I'd had enough. I'd gotten the peace I wanted, and now it was time to go. That last day, I stayed close to camp, packed most of my gear, and kept watch. Nothing happened. Nothing strange. No sounds. No sign of anyone. As night fell, I decided to skip the fire and just go to bed early. It was the worst night yet. I woke up again, heart hammering, feeling something was wrong. I heard soft movement outside. Very soft, very slow. And then the sound of something brushing against the side of the tent. I froze. My mouth was dry. My hand wrapped around the knife. I couldn't see anything. The tent walls blocked everything, and it was pitch dark outside. Then, slowly, I heard the unmistakable sound of something. No, someone, dragging a hand or an object lightly across the fabric of the tent. I lay there, barely breathing, gripping the knife so hard my hand ached. The brushing sound stopped. Then, after a long minute, I heard retreating steps, soft, careful, moving away. I waited what felt like an hour before I finally moved. I didn't sleep again. I sat up, tense, watching the tent walls until the first gray light of dawn crept in. As soon as it was light, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. My heart nearly stopped. There were footprints, clear ones, not boot prints, not heavy hiker's shoes, bare feet. Small, narrow, bare feet, leading up to the tent, circling it, and then heading off into the trees. I felt a surge of panic. Who the hell was walking barefoot out here in the middle of nowhere? I packed my gear as fast as I could, shoving everything into my pack without caring about order. I didn't eat, didn't stop, just stuffed the tent, the stove, everything, and hoisted the pack onto my back. I started hiking out fast. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone step out from behind a tree. The woods were quiet, but now it felt wrong, like the quiet was holding its breath. About an hour down the trail, I found something that stopped me cold. Another piece of fabric. This time, it wasn't on the trail. It was hanging from a branch directly at head height, right beside the path. A strip of pale cloth tied into a loose knot. It was fresh. It hadn't been there when I came in. My mouth went dry. I realized, with a sick feeling, that whoever had been outside my tent had gone ahead of me. I looked around wildly. The trees were thick, dense, full of places to hide. I forced myself to keep walking. I didn't run. I knew that running would make me lose the trail, or worse, make me panic. I walked fast, steady, eyes flicking from tree to tree, every sound making me jump. It took me almost 2 more hours to get back to the car. When I saw it, I almost cried with relief. But then I saw something that made my skin crawl. On the windshield of my car, tucked under the wiper blade, was another strip of pale fabric, tied in a little knot. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock the door. I got in, slammed the doors, locked them, and started the engine. I drove out of there fast, heart pounding the whole way. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station an hour down the road. I sat there in the lot, shaking, trying to calm down. I never went back to that forest. I don't know who the woman was, I assume it was a woman because of the small footprints and the strips of dress-like fabric. But I don't know. I never saw her. What I do know is that someone was out there, watching me, circling my camp at night, leaving signs, moving ahead of me on the trail, and getting close enough to my car to leave a mark before I even arrived. It was real. It happened. And I don't camp alone anymore.